Welcome back to another Tuesday. Thank you for joining me. And for everybody tuning into my main channel, my main material, thank you for your feedback. Thank you for tuning in. The subject of the Bible, which I always like to term in this one term of justification. It's a subject that involves much, uh, but it's simple. It's simple in that it's interactive. And the core of it, when you can manage to sweep away the different rubbish that's out there, the different theories, the different thoughts, when we can even let go of our own perception and allow our perception, as this particular segment of Justification Live has been about emptiness, void, allowing our perception to be in that void, allowing our perception to be in that emptiness, allowing that perception to exist as it ought. The creation can then take place. And previous times before, speaking about the innovation of taking, which is a brilliant thought by one of my viewers, the innovation of Paul, and not necessarily of Paul, because Paul is only doing what other minds before him have done, which is take the initial philosophy that is within the scriptures and innovate it according to the age, according to the times, according to what is suitable, according to what is popular, according to what is marketable. So Paul is just one among many that have taken the initial philosophy that is within the scriptures and have added to it and have subtracted from it to create something relevant for the time that is efficient. That's really the only word I can think of, because I can't think of anything else in me being someone that just cares for Bible. And when I mean someone that cares for Bible, I mean for the perspective that is within the Bible, for the underlying point, for the scope, not letting anything distract from that underlying scope. Sure, that exists, sure, that's there, but there's an underlying point to why the Bible matters. And that underlying point, although created and hyped up and covered with many other things to take away from the illustration, pointing to its wisdom, pointing to its philosophy. We go through generational changes. We go through this, we go through that, but to remain focused is something that I think takes, as Paul always likes to say, patience and temperance, and also joy in the spirit of the living God. And that's something that I want to, touch on at right now, is where that leads to. And that leads to what the Bible terms is salvation or deliverance. And in my main program, Justification. Justification is talking about the aspect of needing deliverance. If something is to be justified, something is to be cleansed. If something is to be cleansed, that means that something is not in a right state at that time, before, and at that time before or after. So justification is the cleansing process of sanctification. And you go to the First Thessalonians, Paul, again, this is the will of God, even your sanctification, that you know how to handle your vessel, not as the Gentiles. And that's not actually talking about the literal vessel of the literal body. This is the vessel where in Ephesians 2, we are to be made a habitation for the living God's Spirit. So it is the vessel of our devotional conversation. Our vessel is what is supposed to be sanctified. Our vessel is what is supposed to be delivered. Our vessel, the vessel of our belief, is what is supposed to be justified. Now, this is the theme from beginning to end, even in the garden, where the confusion there of a tree not cursed and then a tree accursed was put in front of their faces to make a decision. Will they do what they need to in order to maintain the non-cursed tree, or will they revert to what they are accustomed to and to what they will not do for that non-accursed tree, and use that tree of knowledge of good and evil as something to allude or as an assent to truth? And they did. They didn't take the time to examine the work of their creator. They didn't take the time to review the handprints, to review the mind of every element of everything within their garden. And again, this is figurative language. Figurative language pointing to the fact of them, that pair, substituting an instrument for a work that they should have been doing. So instead of delivering what should have been delivered, which is they were created naked and not ashamed, instead of maintaining that position, they decided to clothe themselves. And this is all figurative language for an issue that's still relevant. And the relevance of that issue is that when entered into the religious world and when our belief has whatever it has, we want to cover it with something that we believe is greater than it, and that something outside. We want to cover it and continue to cover it, but we'll never be satisfied. We'll always be looking for more covering. We'll always be looking for more things to hear. We'll never know the fact of the matter and what is within us. The faith or the initial belief within us will pass away, and it'll be as if it never was. But that narrative changes when you get into the scriptures, into its initial philosophy, because the deliverance or the justification or the escape, our conversation is to escape itself. So then you go to the book of Jeremiah. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and they were the joy and the rejoicing of my life. You go to the Psalms. By thy words I have more understanding than the ancients. Thy word is established in heaven. Everything within the scriptures has to do with a personal touch added by words. So no matter what the age is, no matter what we are observing, the Bible is present tense, and it is present tense always and always will be, because its philosophy points to the individual getting personally accustomed to words. And it is from growing accustomed to those words that those words are to be the joy and the rejoicing of our heart and of our life. Instead of putting our joy and rejoicing in other things that are external, instead of putting our joy and rejoicing in whatever deed or whatever act that we're doing for that joy and for that rejoicing, in the long run, when we're going through something, we're not going to have a memory of those deeds and those acts. That's not going to be enough when trauma hits. Trauma hits, we're not going to go. We're not going to be like, okay, so I ate that and I dipped into this months ago. I'm okay. That doesn't work. When trauma hits, we forget everything, and most generally, we dip into an excess that feels comfortable. We dip into an excess that takes us away from the learning that we are supposed to be trained in when it comes to the scriptures. And although it's not easy to do all the time, to remain that straight through trauma, there is a tolerance that is built up by having something within us. Something more than a deed, something more than an act, something more than a theory, something even more than our opinion of our belief or our belief in and of itself. And that is words, not quotations. That is the impact of words. Our conversation is supposed to be moved by what the living God is. Now, Luke 24:39, John 4:24, John 4:24, God is a spirit. Luke 24:39, spirit doesn't have flesh and blood. So if we're looking for something flesh and blood to connote God and to connote our experiences being of or for God, then we're doing something very, very wrong, and that's what the illustration in the garden is for. The illustration in the garden was that they needed something physical. They needed a physical instrument, and not they, well, maybe, but hitting the woman first and then Adam after. A physical instrument was necessary to their logic for allowing them to have the experience that they should experience. They used that knowledge of good and evil, that tree, as an instrument or as a law for their righteousness. And in the end, they died the death. And the death that they died was not a literal death, it was a death of comprehension. And that curse of comprehension continues to this day. So long as we continue to die their death. But the philosophy in the Bible is about escaping the quote unquote death that they suffered. That's the illustration of the crucifixion. Galatians 3:13, he's redeemed us from the curse of the law. Using, and not just that, don't just think of that as Moses. Anything mirroring that, even in 2023, which is going on, anything mirroring that is what the Bible now connotes as sin. 1 Corinthians 15:56, the strength of sin is the law. Again, anything mirroring what Moses gave to them in terms of a philosophical approach through deeds and acts when it comes to their conversation. So this is accursed, and this is what the pair in the garden chose. Instead of exercising their minds on their environment and exercising their minds on their environment, reviewing that to get a better grasp on the voice that they should have listened to instead of something contrary. So this is the issue of justification from beginning of time till now. And despite the innovations that exist, despite the mythologies, despite the theories, despite everything else that exists, the foundational principle is allowing the conversation to escape an irrational experience from a reliance on what is scripted or handwritten to an exercising of the mental faculties, to an exercising of the devotional faculties, the inward devotional faculties, for a personal knowing of the devotional character of the living God. You can go to John 8 where it says, "But I know him and keep his saying." Our conversation is to know that saying. Our conversation is to know the saying that the living God's chief apostle kept and died for. This saying and the experience to know it is really what is referenced when it is eat my flesh and drink my blood. It's figurative language. There's not a call for vampires of any sort. This is figurative language to where flesh really doesn't mean literal flesh, because where literally is the man today to literally eat that flesh? And I'm not acknowledging transubstantiation, allowing a little wafer to be known as flesh. That's also false. So this isn't literal. There is no literal blood. What vein can we cut on that man literally today? Where is the literal man to drink his blood? And that's a perversion, an actual perversion of what the context of that means as it's written in that narrative. Nevertheless, the flesh in that context is the body of belief, is the body of the devotional character. We're to consume that man's devotional conversation. That's that flesh, that's that body. It's not a literal body, this is the body of his mind. We're to consume the body of the man's mind. And we're to drink the man's blood. This isn't literal blood. Every connotation that you can think to it, that's what that is. Blood means tribulation. Blood means strife. Blood means struggle. Blood means overall experience. So we are to eat the devotional conversation of that man. And with that conversation is a mind. The mind of that conversation is to be our diet. And the experience of that conversation is to weigh it correctly. So this is, and this goes along with that same individual honoring that same saying, did the same thing of that same saying. That saying has blood and a body, and he ate it. So there is not an actual call for us to eat that flesh and that drink that blood of that man, because that same saying is what that same individual consumed himself and is now passing on to us the experience. And that is the experience of justification. Barring all of the colorful innovation that exists, the Bible's narrative doesn't change. The Bible's narrative of the conversation being the core of its concern will never change. That's why it says in the book of Psalm 50, last verse, to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God. This is foundational, this is fundamental Bible. Ordering the conversation aright equates to one understanding the living God's salvation or experiencing it. And to order the conversation, that's just a hint that your conversation, that my conversation, that any conversation before us and after us is and will be unhealthy and needing to be put into order. Bible's philosophy is about putting the conversation in order. This is the true definition of salvation. When one can have the conversation put in order, their conversation is saved. There's a method to that. There is a method to that order. There is a method to putting the conversation through that. But again, going back to John 4:24, Luke 24:39, God is a spirit. Spirit doesn't have flesh and blood. The expectation that we're looking for should not be flesh-based, should not be naturally founded, should not be physical. So the Bible's underlying message, the Bible's underlying theme or core, its concern is our devotional conversations conscience. And I go back to Eden, to where that conscience is fully put on display when they did not literally die. In the language there, they died the death. And in the book of Isaiah, you can find that he hath hidden their understanding, he hath closed their eyes. This death, again in Psalms, lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. This is a philosophical Bible here, and this isn't literal death. This is the death of the eyes, and the eyes in the Bible mean the perception of the understanding. So that pair in Eden died the death, or they had their perception put to sleep. Having their perception put to sleep, everything contrary to the initial standpoint of the mind within that garden entered in. And this is the definition of quote unquote sin. This is the sin that entered in. The sin that entered in was the dying concept of the devotional conversations conscience. Passed from one to the next until now. And the escape is, as Paul says in Ephesians 4, put off your former conversation, the old man, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. So literally, I'm not crazy, because this is Bible philosophy and it is written all throughout and confirmed, so which feels good. But at the same time, it's a different thing to read this, and it's a different thing to know it. It's another thing to experience it. So that's why the counsel is eat my flesh, drink my blood, because this isn't a literal, this is figurative. Again, that flesh being the body of the man's understanding, that blood being the experience of that body. So there's nothing literal to eat, nothing physical to eat. This is all experimental, this is all experiential, and this is all having to do with that John 8 saying. And so from the sometime before, when I was on here and talking about the innovation of Paul, and then getting into last week with Victoria, her experiences, the main theme there, um, when you just track it down, when you can separate yourself from that theory, when you can separate from yourself from that opinion, when you can separate yourself from that point of view, is that everything in a real sense that we go through, everything in a real sense that we go through, it's founded upon what we retain inwardly. So everything that we go through is found upon what we retain inwardly. And retaining what we retain inwardly, it is the exercising of that, no matter how many years it takes, no matter what we go through, that will always remain within us. And eventually it will give birth to what is supposed to come up out of us. So it's that same concept, that new covenant principle. I will put my law into their hearts and write it in their mind. That will be their God and they shall be my people. So this is the new promise. And it is a new promise fulfilled not by any deed, not by any act, not by any theory, not by any belief, not without the devotional conversation instructed, but as we are reviewing. And this is you go to the book of Proverbs, and the concept there in Proverbs chapter 3, remember my words, forget not my law, bind them on thine heart, for long life shall they give you. This is a whole nother thing, but the concept of the Bible when it comes to what is everlasting life or what is eternal life, it's sort of split once you exit Malachi and enter Matthew. The Greek context of that is taken out of, whatever we would take it to be, due to how that is framed. But everlasting life, the long life that the living God gives, is not given to the human being after they die. The everlasting life that is given by the living God is not given to anything but the devotional conversations, conscience, through words. It is words that give long life in the book of Proverbs. And as I've experienced and experimented with this, well, this is legit. And in every context that this eternal life or this everlasting life fits, in that first frame, that's the legitimate context. Taken out of context once you get to Matthew and so forth, but the Bible's number one concern is what I mean is the consistent growth and development of our conversation. We can have all of the beliefs and all of the theories. We can do all of the deeds. We can do all of the acts. We can have a scripted religion. We can have a scripted irreligion. We can do everything right according to opinion and belief and theory and self, and yet we can still not be right as human beings. So while everything that is in the Bible is colorful and it's amazing to hear and it's wonderful to theorize on, and so be it, but the ultimate concern within the Bible, it's writing in such a figurative language because concealing a real thought. A real thought for one, the devotional conversations, growth and development, so that through the devotional conversations, growth and development, our human being can benefit from that thereby. There is no physical God instructing anything or anyone that we can go to. There is no physical place that you can say God is there. It doesn't matter what we assume, doesn't matter what we will think, there is no physical person that we can say is God that will correct us. Um, in reality, we have words. Words are left to us. A love letter is left to us, a love letter of instruction. The words are to be the counselor, the words are to be the guide, the words are to be everything. Just as in the beginning, the word was God. In that context of word, you escape that Greek of logos, which is irrelevant, because that dips into something Greek that takes away from the Bible's initial point. That word means wisdom. From the beginning of time, the living God gave wisdom to educate. And the giving of that wisdom, the passing down in its understanding, however it came to us, and however we now have it, there's an underlying wisdom, though covered by whatever is phenomenal or fantastic. There's an underlying point there for the well-being of our conversation's conscience and for the well-being of our human being, its condition. The marrying of these two, our human being and our conversation's conscience, is what I continue to experiment with, and according to how the Bible frames it, to be the highlight of our living experience. So while things are fancy and while things are written the way they are, and it's okay to theorize, or we actually get away from the main point within the Bible, which is a concern for our well-being as human beings and as devotional creatures. And so with everything, on my main channel, and then with these segments of Justification Live, just talking about, I guess in a simple way, how everything of that nature relates. I never like to stray away from the fact of our human being the main idea or the main concern for what is within the Bible. Because when you think about words can affect mentality, words can affect a lot of things, and that's what we have. Only human beings can make words into images, and that's what's been done. Only human beings can make words do something more, especially when the more that the words are already there. So we can make them more than what they are for that more, but words also have to be understood. And that more has to be broken down into something credible. And once our conversation is able to, well, then each and every single one of us being individual entities, being a universe in and of our own, there is a message for our inwards, specific, familiar only to us. And that's really, when you get down to it, what matters. And it just so happens that there's a bit of a distortion on the Bible's philosophy to take us away from that experience. But so long as the conversation is able to discipline itself, and we as human beings are able to step aside and let the conversation experience for itself, no longer letting a human guided experience be taken to be a spiritual experience, just letting the conversation feel, so that it can have its consciousness, and it having its consciousness, our human being can see that, and the two can then begin to commune with what's really real, to what's going on within the sphere or within us. And again, that's the new covenant promise. My words within. In one word, that actually means Emmanuel. And I like to go on and, within us is God. And not in a sense of we are gods or whatever. God also has a connotation and a meaning within the scriptures. Again, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. That word means wisdom. God means wisdom. Within us is wisdom, is what Emmanuel means. So Emmanuel is that foundational philosophy from the beginning of the Bible until the end that remains consistent. That within us, our devotional conversation, in the mind of our human being, is to exist a particular wisdom that when inhaled and when allowed to breathe, and then when exhaled, and then when experimented with, and then when exercised, allows the living experience to be complete, allows it to be full. And that is a journey that doesn't happen overnight. That is a journey that doesn't happen in 10 years, 20 or 30. That is a journey of consistent patience and discipline through trial and error. And by continuing to understand more of the relationship one is supposed to have with those words in the scriptures. So touching on everything from the past two segments, I guess up until now, it's, I've been getting a lot of responses from Paul and the breakdown there, and then the crucifixion, and then the breakdown there, and the concern, which is something I'm hoping for, is a concern to turn inward and then upward, because there is a hidden philosophy within the scriptures that present day religious theory has covered up for could say the same sake as Paul. Modernization for propaganda, for marketing, for whatever you want to think about, but it is intellectually dishonest and spiritually deviant. Not only so, it also hinders us from understanding the devotional character that is within us. And so to just bring that back and to go back into that, becoming that void of creation, being empty for the purpose of being renewed, doing what was done in Genesis 1 on a surface level, willingly becoming empty, just as the environment had to willingly become empty, and then to be recaptured. And when it comes to that title or that subject of justification, which is sanctification, which is the healing and the maintaining, is again First Thessalonians of Paul is saying, of our vessels, not the physical vessels, primarily, secondarily physical, primarily devotional vessels, the vessels of our belief, the body of our belief, that being cleansed or healed or revived. The main issue there within the scriptures is just that central point of, by his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many. And that's really the key there. As the Bible makes a division, by his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many. There's a difference between that servant and that knowledge. That servant is not that knowledge. We falsely confuse the two. But that same servant had to live by that knowledge. That same understanding that that servant lived by and died for is what is for us to grow familiar with as we grow familiar with the scriptures. And in a real way, in a real sense, for our well-being. So I could go forever, but I'm gonna end there. And as usual, for this week, remember to take everything for creation, as I will do the same with you. Take for creation, take for learning, take for healing, take for regenerating, not necessarily who we are in a physical sense, but being mindful of the devotional well-being of our conversation's character that the living God is working with. God is a spirit in Luke 24:39. Luke 24:39, a spirit does not have flesh and blood. So again, to believe that the concern for a redemption is something that has to do with flesh and blood at this point in time, it's kind of backwards and irrelevant to where the scriptures are going. Again, conversation and what is within it. What is within it? What resonates with spirit is what is for spirit. John 3:6. What resonates with spirit is for spirit. And if we're going to claim the living God's spirit as being our healer, well, then there needs to be something going on within the spirit of our mind, said in Ephesians 4, to match what our Creator is about. So everything for this week, as I will do with you, take for creation, take for renewing, take for uplifting, take for strengthening and growing fond of the relationship that human being and the devotional conversation are to have, and then the relationship the devotional conversation is to have with the words within these scriptures. So take care for now.